The story kicks off with a glimpse into the miserable past life of a Japanese salaryman who spends his days getting crushed on crowded trains and barely making it home in time to eat instant noodles alone at his computer. He describes his life as monotonous, filled with work and loneliness, until he suddenly dies and finds himself reincarnated in another world. He wakes up in a new body, lying on his back and reaching a small hand toward the ceiling, shocked to realize his hands are tiny. He stands up in a crib, looking around a room decorated with red curtains and wall-mounted torches. He hops around, inspecting his new, smaller body in a mirror and realizing he is a young child. He steps onto a small red stool to look out a large open window and sees a vast, walled city with mountains in the distance, realizing he is now Lord Van. A maid named Till enters the room and panics when she sees him standing so close to the window ledge, rushing over to grab him and warning him that it is dangerous. Van apologizes, explaining that the scenery was so magnificent he got overwhelmed, which shocks Till because he is using very sophisticated vocabulary for a toddler. She reminds him that he is only 2 years old, which surprises Van as well, as he has vague memories of living there but now fully grasps the reality of his reincarnation. He confirms that her name is Till, and that she is his personal maid. He then introduces himself as Vanni Ferdio, causing Till to clasp her hands in joy and praise him for being able to say his full family name. Van continues to impress her by correctly listing his father, Marquis Jalpa, and his older brothers Marcia, Jard, and Sesto. Van sits at a long, luxurious dining table with his father and 3 older brothers, where they are all being fed by personal maids. Van realizes he has retained his memories from Japan as he opens his mouth for a spoonful of food. The maids pamper him excessively, praising him for eating his vegetables and chewing well, which makes Van feel like he is a VIP customer at a hostess club rather than a child at dinner. His father, a gray-haired man with a stern demeanor, asks the older brothers about their studies. Jard says he is learning fire magic and battle formations, and Sesto says he is studying magic. When the father asks Van what he will do, Van surprises everyone by saying he wants to study the nation's culture and history because there is a lot he doesn't know. His father laughs heartily, admitting he thought he had been spoiling Van since he is the last child of his late wife Mira, but realizes Van is already a fine young lad. He expresses his certainty that Van will possess powerful fire magic like himself and Mira, securing the future of House Fertio, and says he looks forward to Van's magical aptitude appraisal when he turns 8. Van narrates that in this world, magical aptitude is crucial for nobles, with the 4 elemental magics, fire, water, wind, and earth, being highly desired for their offensive capabilities, while other types are seen as a disgrace. Later, Van sits at a large desk in a sunlit library with Till standing beside him. He asks her if the local port is the only place ships can sail, and she explains that huge monsters lurk in the deep ocean, making travel dangerous elsewhere. He asks about the different races, and she mentions elves and dwarves, but tells him it might be too complicated. Van insists he wants to learn more and asks her to teach him about magic tools. Till is flustered but explains that magic crystals and gemstones can store magic, allowing people to create tools related to their elemental aptitude. Van grins, realizing he can make things using his previous life's knowledge. Suddenly, an elderly butler with glasses named Espada interrupts, questioning how much a 2-year-old actually knows. He stares at Van intensely, making Van nervous, and asks about his numeracy skills. Van modestly says he can do a little addition and subtraction. Espada holds up 2 fingers on one hand and 3 on the other, asking for the sum. Van correctly answers 5. Espada immediately declares that he will become Van's tutor. Van describes the next 2 years as hell, as Espada forces him to study from dawn to dusk, though he admits he learned to read, write, and calculate within weeks. By the time Van turns 4, he is out in the garden practicing swordsmanship. He swings a wooden sword at a maid, who playfully dodges and falls backward to let him win. He lunges at her again, but this time he loses his balance and falls onto the grass. He breathes heavily, exhausted, while the maid celebrates her victory, telling him she wins. Van pouts, but another maid scolds the winner for being disrespectful to a noble and demands she be punished. The winning maid is terrified and held back by others, but Van walks over and gently flicks her forehead, declaring the matter settled. He smiles at her, diffusing the situation. Van narrates that he continued studying swordsmanship every day, and by age 5, he was fighting on equal terms with older soldiers in training. He is shown sparring with a brown-haired boy, blocking attacks with a shield and countering with a wooden sword. He knocks the boy down and offers him a hand to stand up, sharing a snack with him afterward. The other kids are amazed, but a noble treats them so well and talks to them despite their lower status. While Van rests on a bench drinking water, a large muscular man in armor approaches. This is D, the chivalric order's deputy commander. He asks to see Van's hands and is surprised to find them soft and without calluses, deducing that Van isn't training at night. Van explains that his academic studies are too tough to allow for extra training. D mentions he heard Espada ordered Van to study 3 times harder than normal, which causes Van to scream in horror and bang his head against a table in despair. D sees an opportunity and enthusiastically offers to plead Van's case if Van agrees to let D teach him swordsmanship personally. D promises to make him the nation's greatest swordsman. Van agrees, hoping to balance both, but asks D to go easy on him. D laughs and agrees, but Van narrates that it was a bald-faced lie. The scene cuts to D screaming like a demon while flying through the air and attacking Van during training. Van is forced to do hundreds of swings and is not allowed to sit down during breaks, with D forcing him to rest in a squatting position instead. Van thinks D is an idiot, not a demon, but he admits that despite the hardships, he is enjoying his new life and feels a satisfaction he never had in Japan. At age 6, Van is walking through a bustling market with Till and 2 knights. He is exhausted from his schedule and decides he wants to become a slacker to enjoy a normal childhood. He marvels at the size of the market and stops in front of a massive building called the Merry Chamber of Commerce. Suddenly, he hears shouting and sees a man dragging a bruised child with purple hair by a rope. The knights prepare to draw their swords, but Van signals them to stop and asks the man why the child is bound. The man claims it is his son and he is selling him into slavery because they are poor. Van is appalled but then notices a woman named Rosalie approaching. She recognizes Van as the Marquise's son and welcomes him. Van asks how much the boy is worth. The trader says the boy has theft magic, so he's worth 3 large silvers. The trader kicks the child, calling him useless. Van intervenes, grabbing the trader's arm, and offers 5 large silvers to buy the boy. Till hands Van the money, and he pays the trader, who leaves. Van kneels down to the child, whose name is Kamsin, and tells him he is free to go. Kamsin is confused, but Van insists he just wanted to help. However, Kamsin has nowhere to go, so Van agrees to take him in, though Till warns that he must be brought in as a slave to be allowed in the mansion. Van agrees and takes Kamsin to get clothes and finalize a slave contract with Rosalie, who is shocked and delighted to be thanked by a noble. Later, Van is sitting in a room eating a pastry when Kamsin, now wearing a navy blue uniform, enters and tells him Deputy Commander D is looking for him. Van tries to bribe Kamsin with the pastry to say he isn't there, but Kamsin points out that people already saw Van enter. Van notices Kamsin isn't wearing the gloves he bought him. Kamsin explains he wants to show off the crest on his hand that symbolizes his bond with Van. Suddenly, Kamsin shouts Van's name and rushes out the door to block D. D, a towering figure in silver armor, asks where Van is. Kamsin lies, claiming Van isn't there, but D spots pastry crumbs on Kamsin's face. D wipes a crumb off and accuses Kamsin of lying. Kamsin denies it, but D gets angry at the disrespect. However, D is impressed by Kamsin's courage to talk back and decides to drag Kamsin away to train him in Van's place. Van watches from behind the door, apologizing silently to Kamsin as the boy is dragged away screaming. Time passes, and Van turns 8. The townspeople are excited about his magical aptitude appraisal, hoping he will become their lord because of his kindness. In a large green-lit room, Van stands before his father and family members. The appraisal reveals that Van has no aptitude for the 4 elemental magics and instead possesses production magic. The adults are horrified, as production magic is considered the most unfortunate type because it only allows for creating items that can be made without magic. His father is furious, shouting that he and his late wife were powerful fire mages, so a production mage is a disgrace. He calls Van a failure and, in a fit of rage and shame, draws his glowing sword and swings it down to kill Van. Van stares back, resigned to his fate. However, his brother Mercia intervenes just in time. Mercia suggests that instead of killing Van, they should entrust him with a remote, undeveloped village on the border. The village has no industry and is near mountains filled with monsters, making it effectively an exile. The father agrees to this proposal, telling Van to leave as soon as he is ready. Later, Mercia apologizes to Van for the rash proposal, but explains it was the only way to save his life. Van thanks his brother and vows to do his best to develop the village. Mercia promises to help however he can. Van is then shown packing in a room full of crates. Till is furious about the exile, shouting that sending him to such a remote place is outrageous. Van, however, smiles and says he's looking forward to it. He believes that as a lord of a rural town, he will have plenty of free time to live a lazy, fun life and turn the place into something to his liking. He prepares to leave with a carriage and about 10 adventurers hired by Mercia. Suddenly, Till hikes up her maid skirt and starts performing sumo-style leg stomps in a fit of determination, shouting that she is his personal maid and is coming with him. Van is surprised, but then the two knights, Arb and Law, appear and announce they are taking early retirement to join him as well. Espada the butler also appears, claiming he has trained his successor and wants to supervise Van's studies as entertainment for his old age. Van looks distressed, begging them to stop piling on, but they are all determined to follow him. The group sets off in a carriage. Van notices the carriage does not bear the Marquise's crest. Realizing his father wanted him to leave secretly without anyone knowing, he feels a bit anxious about going to the frontier. Suddenly, he hears a voice calling his name and tells the driver to stop. He looks out the window and sees a red-haired man on a horse riding alongside them. It is one of Dee's subordinates. He tells Van that Dee was saddened by the secret departure and ordered them to display banners and give Van a grand send-off. The camera pulls back to show the streets lined with cheering townspeople waving banners that read, "Lord Van is departing." The soldier admits Dee is pretending to be asleep so he doesn't have to revoke the order. The crowd chants Van's name, wishing him well and asking him to come back soon. Van, who was trying to be stoic, is moved to tears by the display of affection. He leans out the window and waves to everyone, thanking them as the carriage rolls away toward his new life, marking the beginning of his journey as the lord of the remote village.